the story of how John Nephew and Michelle Nephew met and fell in love. Actually, he was exhibiting at the really small game convention at my alma mater that was in Platteville, Wisconsin, at the university there. And so he was manning a booth, and from his perspective, he says he sees this gorgeous girl come in and can't believe that she's not in the wrong place. And so he immediately starts trying to sell me Once Upon a Time, actually, which is still one of my favorite games with Atlas. And unfortunately, I was far too poor for a $25 game. So instead, he invited me to lunch, and we talked of gaming and Ursula Le Guin. And later on, I actually followed up to buy a Vampire the Masquerade supplement from him that he had for some strange reason. So if it wasn't for gaming, I never would have met my husband.
So what do you do now for
Pretty much everything. John runs the sales and business side of the business, and I do all the production work. My dissertation, actually, for my PhD, I did it on authorship and role-playing games. And effectively, I was talking about how the authorial position changes in role-playing games as it goes from one step to the other in the process. For example, you've got the designer who designs the original rules and the setting and whatnot, and you've got the adventures writer who designs the adventure itself. You've got the GM who's reinterpreting that for his own group, adding some, taking things out. The players themselves who then add more of their own reactions and steering the plot in the direction they want, and so on and so forth from that. So basically it was about authorship and role-playing games. I also managed to sneak some other things in that I actually wanted to talk about more. Things like gender identity in role-playing games and things like that. But I had to stick inside of a literary framework because it's an English PhD, obviously. So I also tied it into H.P. Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos because of the literary beginnings, and ended up using Call of Cthulhu actually as my exemplar throughout. So that's what my dissertation was about.
I did not write a doctoral dissertation on anything. Apple pie was good. My daughter is awesome. She's going to be a deep one for Halloween. Her name is Ileana. And I have another daughter who's due in 2 weeks, and her name will be Aurora. Isn't that exciting? But anyway, that's probably not what you wanted to talk about.
No, it's not. You know what the first artwork that you did for gaming company?
I did some stuff for Dragon Lords of Melnibone by Chaosium, like 2 or 3 pictures. And then I was here at Origins in 2001. I just got laid off from my job, and I was trying to sell art in the art show, and I was just doodling something. I looked up, and Larry Elmore and Margaret Weiss were standing in front of me. And they're like, "We want you to do our monster book for Sovereign Stone." And so I went from 3 pictures in some obscure Chaosium product that no one ever bought to like 220 pictures in the bestiary. So that was pretty cool. And yeah, so that's the first big project. And then from there, it's been, up and down and everywhere else. And now I just got to do an awesome project for Atlas Games, and I'm really excited about that. And now I'm having lunch with some friends. The cool kids too.
The project now, or you can't talk about it?
Oh, we just talked about it. It was Where the Deep Ones Are. It's where the wild things are mixed with Shadow over Innsmouth. I just want to say the story of Innsmouth, but that's not it at all. Actually, I never want to say that. I just happen to. Now, you should ask Clint some questions. He's a really interesting guy. I don't know, what else do you want to know about?
Some stories you have about what you do.
How is a chicken like a grape? It's a joke.
Okay. How is it?
They're both purple, except for the chicken. Okay, tough crowd. I'll begin with my birth. I was born 6 weeks early, so I'm a preemie. That's why I'm short, and everyone says I look like Danny DeVito. And on that note, everyone always says, "Hey, you look like Danny DeVito," and then I get just a little bit offended, because Danny DeVito's cool, but he's not sexy or anything. And then they're like, "But he's rich." And so my question is, do I look short, fat, and bald, or do I look rich?
For an artist to draw your character, you can hand it to them and say, here's my character, and they'll wash that over a poser thing, so you can get it from all angles and stuff. That's what I
I'm
want.
sure that's possible.
Yeah, but I haven't heard that it's guaranteed that they're going to do that yet. And like all gamers, I'm going, okay, show me the money.
Yeah.
You know, you promised this thing. Why is it taking so long? It's taking so long. There must be teething troubles. You know, so I'm at that stage. Yeah, if somebody can show me that, I would love to see it at Gen Con. You know, where they get all the TV screens at some booth, and you sit down and actually use it yourself.
Right.
If I can look at it and say, oh, this is cool, I'm waiting for that moment. If it happens,
we have
I'm
a
there.
lot of authors right now that are sitting on their last books.
That's not up
And
to
some of them that, die before they complete the book.
Well, yeah, but that's not up to the author, usually. I mean, sometimes it is. I'm 6 months late on a book right now. But,
I
and
wasn't
shouldn't be here.
referring to you,
But I'm writing about 14 books at the moment, but the book that I'm late on is Archwizard, the second Solaris book. Dark Lord is already out, Archwizard is the second one, and Falcon Fire is the third. And it should be out by the end of the year, okay? The Forgotten Realms book, the next one will be The Sword Never Sleeps, the third Knightsmith Trainer book, which should also be out sort of November, December. That one's done. But you see, when I was saying that sometimes it's also the publisher's fault, not the author's, well, Sword Never Sleeps is finished. So is Dark Vengeance, the sequel to my Dark Warrior Rising. They're in the publisher's hands.
There's always a really
So
big
you've
lag.
done your.
Yeah. Now there's usually a
You're
9.
not the one we'll be mad at.
Okay. There's a 9-month lead time, okay, in publishing between when you turn in the novel and when it appears in the stores. And if you want to short circuit that 9 months lead time, you pay. So if, say, Princess Diana dies and they want an instant book out there, they bumped other books. They've grabbed the press time and the paper that's been pre-bought. It's just like the stock market where you option something. They've pre-bought the press time for that book, and they bump it aside so they can get their instant book. Anything that's less than that cycle. And 9 months is sort of the big New York fiction publisher average. It's different for different companies. Your company could do it shorter than 9 months because, yeah. And I've from years of doing anthologies with Jim Lauder, in which they deliberately sort of went hunting for down press time. They'd say, okay, you had an overrun, can we buy that hour and print half the book? And then we'll wait 6 months and then print another half the book. And I have a friend up in Canada who prints glossy pamphlets. Like if Columbus was doing one of these things, so, and he does it for the Canadian government ones and all the tourism things, Niagara Falls. Everybody loves Marineland, that sort of thing. And he faxes it to a client or PDFs it to a client. They sign off on it, then he prints it, and he's charging them, say, 132 grand for so many pamphlets. And they go on this huge piece of paper that's going to get cut by the knife 16 ways. So if there's all these blank things, he goes, okay, what's the color palette? I can sneak that in around the edges. And I can give you a cut rate if you're a church group or whatever, and that's how the industry works. And there are actual publishers who say, okay, I'm doing a small pulp, say I'm doing Lovecraft pastiches or Sherlock Holmes pastiches. Okay, I get my book together, it's so many signatures, and then you go shopping. And get the things around. I mean, there's nothing illicit about this because the illicit part was when all the large conglomerates started buying up all the paper mills in Canada and shutting them down. And then all of a sudden there was a shortage of paper, and all of a sudden paper prices went like this. You went, all those people sitting up out of work in Quebec who have all those mills that have been shut down. What paper shortage? It's an artificial paper shortage. So, I mean, there are ways around it. And there are people in Toronto who have their own artisan paper. They have a little paper mill that's done like 2 or 3 people in a coach house in the back, and they do all these weird papers. If you want gold thread put through it and stuff like that, and they're fun. And if you want your wedding invitations to be different from everybody else's wedding invitations, they will do them for you. But they will also print, little books. And of course, the way things work up in Canada is they're also working on government grants to do cultural stuff. So if you want to do poetry about one family from this lost native village, and you get your 17-page book together, they are happy to do that for you because that makes the government look kindly on them for doing cultural stuff. It's different down here. Down here, it's free enterprise. Up there, there's this desperate attempt to grab with both hands onto what we call Canadian culture, you know, to avoid being swallowed by the American culture. Not very well. But it creates this weird little system of Canada Council grants. You know, that if your book has, you know, a Mountie in it, Métis, or Native people,
Or if you have like a maple leaf.
polar bears hugging polar bears, and you can get a Canada Council grant. If it's anything historical about a particular figure, and it would, I've seen the same thing. I've seen heritage grants in Ohio when they're writing about early people, the settlers. You know, if you're going to bring that forward as a scholarly work, you know, you've gone to all the tombstones and you've written down who, and you've worked out the family tree, you'll get a grant for that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I mean, it creates this little space around the edges for people to run their print jobs in. But other than that, it's the 9-month cycle.
Wow.
And there are times when I'll get phone calls from New York where they say, "Okay, Ed, do you mind if we bump your book to the next bit of the cycle? Because we've got a chance to do fine. Are you going to do any marketing for my book?"
Yeah.
If the answer is no, it really doesn't matter when it comes out, right?
Right, exactly.
But, you know, if it's something I could write on with somebody else's, because then they could do a piggyback ad, you know, where they do 3 or 4 fantasy books, and their covers are these little gray photocopy blobs in locus, and yours is on the bottom left. You know, it's better than nothing. But, you know, but you have to understand that sometimes when an author doesn't produce something, it's not always the author's fault. They turned it
I'm talking about
in.
the authors who keep the public up to date on where they are.
Oh, on their blogs.
Writing.
Okay.
And
well,
they're like,
Yeah,
oh,
Would you rather have
that
him write the
book
words to
came
the
out
book
a
or the
year
words in,
later.
Yeah.
an email or a blog that
Exactly.
says why it's
yes.
late?
I write books faster than most people, and I don't blog because you can do one or the other.
Yeah.
It's the same as when you're on the circuit, and there are authors, and there are writers. Writers are, oh, I'm overdoing this book. I got 6 projects on the go. Oh, sure, I can work you in. And then there's authors. Oh, I struggled so on my last book. I hope you realize the sacrifices I go to, eating rats in tenements, so I know how it feels.
Just so you could read my words and be inspired by them.
That's right.
You should bow down. Bow down now.
Yes. And then
That
most people,
wasn't me saying
most people are in between those two extremes. But there are people who definitely do the circuit, and I think you could be writing. You could sit at home, shut up, and write. I want the book.
That's the case in a number of them. I see like, oh, I went to this and this and this, and
I have
read.
to run to my gaming thing. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
A pleasure.
And honor and pleasure to meet you.
Gosh.
She plays a great monkey woman, by the way. Nice to meet you. And I've heard, I loved Batman Returns.
Okay,
It was
thank
really-
you.
I have a question for Dr. Nephew. I have to ask you. Okay, when you present that thesis, you had to defend it. Against whom? Who would they get as a board?
Well, actually, it happened mainly because I chose the right school. I went to the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee, and they had, and still do have, a very good 20th century studies program, which is 21st century studies by now, I would hope. But, and so effectively they have a really strong emphasis on cultural studies. And so that's a lot of how this came about, was that I was able to get my advisor to speak up for me and to make the argument to even allow me to do the dissertation in the first place. And so mainly I ended up with cultural studies professors from the school who were on my committee. So. That would have been more interesting. But the hardest part was actually the audience. My my father-in-law has a PhD in philosophy, and so he knew that there can be an audience at these things. And so even though I didn't mention it, he suddenly started saying, "Yeah, and we're all going to come to your dissertation defense." And so then my mother heard about it, and so I ended up with my in-laws, my brother and sister, my mother and dad, and my aunt, I believe, all sitting around the sides of the room. I mean, it wasn't a big lecture hall or anything. It was just a conference room with chairs set up around the outside edge, and my whole family sitting there watching me defend my dissertation. My mom, like halfway through, we go out for a break, and she's like crying because she thinks I'm not going to get my PhD because they're being so mean to me. And no, Mom, it's just, yeah, that's what it is. So yeah.
What kind of arguments do they have against your?
Well, I mean, it's a niche area. I mean, we're a small subculture, and so mainly it was, well, the first argument was that it's not exactly, it's an English PhD, and it's not exactly literary based. So I introduced a lot of the H.P. Lovecraft and Cthulhu mythos as my exemplar because of that. So to add more of a literary element to it, and it's just not something that's been done at all. So I mean, anything new is, anything new is gonna get an argument. So it was a little bit of a discussion to get permission to do it.
That's cool, because that's the one thing that always fascinated me. You know, then they'd say doctorate, and then they'd say, "What, you had your doctorate?" And I'd say, "How the hell did they get a panel together?" Wow.
And now I've heard of other people doing like master's theses and stuff on gaming, but not too many dissertations. But it's happening more and more, and the more people do it, the more it becomes accepted. So yeah. And it wasn't that. It's getting to be a long time ago now that I did mine. So the more I think about it, no.
It was yesterday.
Oh yes, that's right. That's right.
Cosmically speaking.
You're still 20. Tell yourself
I'm 20 at heart.
For the fourth time.
Yeah.
Not that old.
Oh, wow.
24? You're not 24?
Oh no, I thought you meant
Not 80.
like
Okay, it wasn't in math.
Yeah.
And there's fighting.
Oh, I was never hired per se. I've never been a staffer. No, I didn't help to create D&D. I've worked and play tested on all the other editions since, just as a gamer out there who they have under NDA, so they can throw stuff in front of me, and I can't blather about it. And good companies, if they've got their wits about them, do send things to people who are a step removed from the design process, because when you're in the design process, you're too close to it to see possible flaws or just other ways of viewing the material, because you all think alike, you work together on it. You may not realize that you left out some pretty obvious explanation somewhere that somebody who doesn't play games at all, for instance, could go, "Oh, it's the Emperor's clothes thingy. Hey, he's not wearing any clothes. Oh, shit, I got that." So you have somebody from the outside to look at what you're working on, and I got used a lot that way. And I just had generated articles on Dungeons and Dragons related stuff for years for Dragon, just because I wanted to. For one thing, I thought it was marginally fairer if I was going to throw stuff at my players in the Forgotten Realms if I had the stuff published in Dragon already. Then if they read it but didn't have the issue in front of them and they vaguely remembered something about what was in it, it's sort of like, as a citizen, you vaguely remember something about the Grand Canyon, but you can't quite remember what it is. It might help you, it might not. You might remember, "Oh, don't go near the edge," or you might come back to crystal clarity at the right time, which is okay. But it was, in the early days of D&D, everybody, all players and DMs, if they had a chance, read Dragon. That was it. It was the monthly Houthorg. And if you didn't buy it, you borrowed a friend's copy, or you looked at a friend's copy while you were there for playing it. It was it. So I was never, a staff designer or anything, no. But every year at Gen Con, I would arrive a few days early at TSR and take everybody out to lunch, which may be incredibly popular. and the rest of the year, I would be their father confessor figure. Because everybody in the company, if they get really steamed, they need someone to bitch to, but it has to be somebody who understands what they're bitching about, who can't say anything, so it won't get out, so they won't get in trouble, but they just need to vent. So I'd be at the public library and somebody would phone up and say, man, do you know what idiots have done? Really? That's nice. But I couldn't tell anyone. Couldn't tell who was calling or what they were calling about. And, you know, my fellow librarians would walk past and say, another of your Gamers Anonymous calls? They wanted a new world for the it was supposed to be a new world for the second edition, and it actually came out before second edition was really at the door. And they no longer wanted to develop Greyhawk because of the troubles between Gary and the company, and they had spent all the staff time and hired outside artists and spent 2 years to do Dragonlance, and they wanted a world that wasn't as much of a one-story world, because Dragonlance was built around this epic, like The Lord of the Rings, save the world. What do you do for an encore? Hey, save it again. Boring. So they wanted a setting that was set up with 1,000 stories, and they didn't want to spend company time and money on that scale again, so they said, maybe some idiot out there has a world we could just buy. And Jeff Grubb happened to be a regular reader of Dragon, and he said, hey, this guy keeps mentioning the Forgotten Realms. And he phoned me up one afternoon at the library and said, so, do you have a complete detailed world at home, or do you just make this stuff up as you go along? And I said, yes and yes. He says, good, send it. That's how I got to the Forgotten Realms. No, it's not, you know, it's not that I'm some great sage with, I'm just a guy who writes really fast. No, I'm not. I'm incredibly sexy, really.
I was going to say that.
Thank you.
There weren't that many authors for it back then either. I mean, my husband John, he started writing for Dragon when he was 15, I believe. And he tells stories of how he had professional credits and was writing for TSR when he was 19 or so, and going to conventions and people not realizing he wasn't even drinking age yet.
Yes.
So,
That was true.
so yeah, I
He
mean,
did Hall of Heroes, or the section of the Hall of Heroes that was my Forgotten Realms characters. He
so
did.
talent was able to bring you a long way in the day when there weren't very many people to be competing with. I think like D20 really opened that field up
Yes.
a lot, because suddenly everyone has a forum to be able to publish their material.
Yeah, that made a real difference. And the other thing was, in the early days, it was gamers. My first book, Spellfire, got edited by the secretarial pool, who were typing it in because they hadn't bought me the computer that was supposed to be my down payment, so I could write it on a computer. So I was typing it, and whenever they wanted revisions, I'd cut and paste, photocopy, put a new paragraph
Can't
in.
even imagine the horror of writing books before computers.
Ooh, it was fun.
They were much shorter. If you look at like my science fiction
This is
stuff,
true.
they're much thinner.
This is
books
true.
than
400
these
pages
days.
was an epic.
Well, okay, but yeah, there's market pressures of that too. Many of the early fantasy and science fiction books you see today are collections from what originally appeared in the pulps. And they had this deadline and this time count and this word count, and it had to fit.
Yeah, Pulp were like magazines.
Yeah.
They had to be out by this date every week and
That's
stuff.
right.
So
Yeah. Whereas the hardcover novel that climbs the bestseller list, well, fantasy and science fiction books, until Arthur C. Clarke, did not ever hit the bestseller list. And then when they hit the bestseller list, and again, that price of paper increase I was telling you about, and they started putting the price of a hardcover bestseller up, well, then the booksellers started saying, you know, people are bitching about paying $20 for this thin book. Could you make them thicker? Well, you can blow up the typeface and put huge margins on them, but you want more word count. And authors love that because they're never finished adding more stuff. As you know, the editrix goes,
Underneath the manuscript.
yeah. Stop tweaking it. And actually, that was something said to me years ago. I won't say by whom. When I said, well, do you want it good or do you want it now? And the guy laughed and said, Ed, don't ever ask such a stupid question. In our industry, the answer is always now. We don't want it good, we want it now. So, okay. But one of the reasons I got to write a lot of stuff is my stuff might not have been game design ready in the raw manuscript, but it was English ready, except for my British spellings or Canadian spellings. They chop up a lot of U's, but I could write in complete sentences, and some of the game designers can't. and they change tenses, and they use they a lot when it's one person.
Oh my god.
Yeah, yes, yeah. And it used to drive me nuts when I read their raw stuff. I'd be going, like some of the early Thieves World packages that were just sent around privately amongst the contributors, and Andy Offit's contributing the gods, and Bob Asperin's saying, okay, here's how the Watchers, and you read it and go, is English your first language? Any of you guys? You know.
What's funny is with Ars Magica, sometimes it's not. Because we actually have a lot of fans contributing to the source books. And for example, the German Tribunal book was actually written by a couple of German guys. And it comes through in the English, and wow, that one was tough to edit because mainly I'm chopping sentences throughout the entire book. But yeah, so sometimes it's not actually the first language.
No, and Romans, they go the house. You know that yeah, you can see that happening.
Just a question I had. It's funny because I had that question in my head, pop in my head about 2 days ago when you did that. Was it yesterday? There's no bad game. The only bad game was
that was
the way
yesterday.
around. Yeah. When is someone going to put out a tell-all book on the gaming industry?
Well,
Ooh.
did you buy 40 Years of Gen Con?
No, and I saw it. I might go
Well, I think you
because
should. Well, I think
I
you should.
saw it at the
No,
booth there.
honestly, I learned a lot from that book. There's a lot of anecdotes in there about things that were going on behind the scenes that I'm sure you even learned something, Ed, looking through that.
It's fascinating.
I was actually looking at the final product thinking, God, Robin left a lot out. There's a lot of stuff he just sort of, there's a lot of stuff there he sort of like implies or points to, and then you go, oh, come on, Robin, you should just told that one. File off the names and tell it. The couple making love on the cart in the loading dock, and it started moving. And it was a long concrete loading dock. And the loading dock in Mecca, the old thing, you drove in one side, you drove out the other. It was one way, and they had all these diagonal loading docks, and it was all dirty concrete. And they had these huge old wooden carts with stake pockets at the corners that you could pile up tables and stuff on, or your stuff on, and you'd push these squeaking, squealing things. Well, a couple found each other at the convention at one point, and on the Sunday when, well, yes, they were making love, and the thing started to roll. And the whole, because Milwaukee has the same sort of torrential downpours that you get here on occasion, everything is sloped, so it will drain somewhere.
As much as we have the past few weeks.
No, but you know what? If you notice, there are catch basins around town on the corners, and many bits of pavement are sloped. You go, why is it sloped? Oh, I mean, I wouldn't slope that. Oh, I see. It's going into the catch basin. You know, some architect would say, okay, so you have quick runoff. Well, in the same way, everything in Milwaukee had a little slope to it. And eventually the cart gathered speed, and they were sort of clinging to each other into it by then with their fingernails.
The tighter they grabbed, the faster it went.
And it came out the end. And everything at Mecca had all these old veterans who worked for Mecca. They'd show up in their uniforms with their medals, and there were the security guys. They were basically making sure you didn't walk in without paying or walk into the...
Just roll in.
And well, this cart came rolling out.
You have to pay a drayage fee for that?
And they came rolling out into the sunshine, right there in the busy streets, just coming to the edge of the apron. One of the guys says, "Holy shit!" And the old guy says, "Oh, that's okay, gamers." every year at this time. Oh yeah. Oh, I can tell Gen Con stories, and there are lots of them that we left out. Well, a certain game designer who shall remain nameless, who had hearing aids, and he said to two other people, one of whom was me, at the safe house, "Okay, I'm going to get drunk tonight. Get me home, Phyllis." Took his hearing aids out and tossed him in a glass. So he drank. So we're taking him home to the hotel with the arm over the shoulder on both sides, and we're walking over the river bridge. It's a hot, sultry summer night. The cops are smoking in their cruisers and driving around very slowly with the windows down, and they sort of come up beside us. We are assisting this particular game designer to share all his briefly rented beer with the river. And they sort of slow down. Then they pick up speed again and turn the corner. And then we're getting them along the bridge closer to the hotel. And they come around again. Evening, officer. And Any problems? No, not at all. So, what's happening? Oh, we're just taking our friend home. I see. You, out for a night on the town? Yes, sir. And, do you do this often? Oh, no, only once a year, sir. Here, sir. Bring your tourist dollars to your fair city, sir. Uh-huh. It's okay, sir. We're Canadian. Oh, okay. Picks up speed, drives along, gets about 20 feet away. Car screeches to a halt. Wait a minute. What? There were all sorts of things, and I will draw the veil of decency over the lady who wore nothing but boots, who walked her two Dobermans through the convention center at 3 in the morning. The security guys were all excited about that the next day. They were really excited that some guy hadn't loaded the film on the security camera, so it was just the guys who'd seen it got to and that was great fun.
One of the troubles with the book was actually, limiting it, because it could have been 300 pages if we were not careful. And so one of the big criteria that Robin was using, he and we talked about this a lot, was trying to make sure that there were events that impacted a good number of people. So it wasn't always just insider stuff. So that it was things that everyone would remember. And so that was one of the biggest things. But
One of the most dramatic things I remember from early Gen Con is before Milwaukee was camping out in this little campground. We walked through Petrified Springs County Park for every day to reach the con and back. And it was pouring rain most of the weekend. And then one night the heavens opened and we'd all gone out the back way. And this had a little futuristic bus shelter, which at least protected you from the rain. And we made it as far as the bus shelter. We were standing there watching the rain just pound down out of the sky. And all the exhibitors were coming out the back going, oh my God, and then trying to run for their cars. And one guy had a diorama. This is the early days of gaming. So it's a sheet of plywood, paper mache, painted green, that you put your Airfix figures on. And he puts it over his head. This is a sheet of plywood. And he gets about halfway across the parking lot. It's broken. It's down around his face. And he's running blind. And it was raining so hard that the vehicles in the parking lot were beginning to hydroplane and drift down to the bottom of
this one is not. Robin was not able to confirm this one with anybody else.
But it's true. Ask any of my players. Ask if Bob Blake is still alive. Ask him, because he sheltered in the same. And he said, "Holy shit!" That's because we had this old bus called the Galloping Goose, which Tom Wam drove, and it was down at the bottom. And it was a really old, battered school bus, and it was collecting cars. Boom, boom, boom. Nothing was really denting each other unless their bumpers were at a really different height, because it was all so gentle. But they were just, it was raining so fast that it was lifting them, and they were just, because the whole lot was heavily cambered, they were all just collecting at the bottom. Oh, it was just incredible. And of course, there was a strict rule about not sleeping in the university overnight. But the next morning, all these gamers were just flaked out of it because the caretaker hadn't the heart to throw them out into this maelstrom. It was, and as we walked through the county park, there were drowned things, cats, dogs, cows, everything in the river. Oh yeah, it was a real. But yeah, that was fun, and that was the last convention at which we could still play Killer.
Yeah, we have a section on that actually.
And Killer was this game now outlawed because some kid got shot dead by a security guard somewhere in the United States, where a number of people would play the game. They all had a water pistol. Usually it was a Green Avenger, and you broke off all the pieces, so you just had the reservoir and the plunger, so people couldn't see it in your hand. And you had a photograph of someone else in the game. You didn't know who they were. You just had their photograph. When you saw them, you'd try and kill them. Well, someone had your photograph, too. So all it was an ongoing game throughout the convention. But what it meant was you'd be sitting there in the dealer's area, or you'd be talking to someone in the halls, because Wisconsin Parkside was a series of futuristic buildings strung out along a straight with flying covered bridges joining them. So it was long and narrow, like this convention center, only with a hell of a lot more walking and lots of, and you'd be somewhere in the convention, and all of a sudden somebody would go, phew! So you'd be talking to some gaming company executive, and suddenly somebody would drop on them and pin them to the floor. He's trying to get you. Or that was our excuse, anyway. It was great fun. So of course, like all great fun things, we can't do it anymore. A security guard, and as far as I know, it wasn't even a gaming convention, turned around and shot a kid dead because the kid pulled his water pistol and he just saw the motion, so he used his combat training and blew the kid away. So for safety reasons, prudence, we don't play it anymore. It's a pity because it was fun. Although it was considered beyond the pale to do it to somebody when they were doing their seminar. You know, so you're standing at the front of the stage. No, okay, that's not fair. Let the guy finish his seminar before you toast him. But yeah,
Waiting to meet you.
Yeah, and standing in line for autographs. Hi, sign this. No. Yeah.
It's called 40 Years of Gen Con. Well, it's a series of interviews, so the compiler is Robin Laws. But Ed is one of the authors, effectively. There's just dozens of people interview clips throughout the entire book. So
There's a website for it too, if that's still up.
it's genconhistory.com.
Yeah. And there's like funny anecdotes on there from some people, and there's pictures from, I guess I didn't make it in the book.
Yep,
From
all
all
kinds of
different-
pictures.
So
Well,
that's fun,
because
too.
we were appealing to pretty much all the fans for content, so we were actually collecting stories and photos through the website, and then giving out prizes and stuff for people whose stuff got in. So all that's still up there, actually.
It's still, you still have it? Okay.
Yep.
You locked the forums.
Yeah, we locked the
Yeah.
forums because we just don't need more stories. But as a method of keeping them, preserving them as they were when the book came out. So
The old pictures are a lot of fun.
yeah. One of the
Going through stuff, and there was stuff I couldn't remember. I said, I have to find my old brochures and.
One of the biggest problems we had was from the time period when digital cameras just started coming out, but the quality of those pictures was so bad that I would get these fantastic pictures, but they'd only be like 72 DPI or even less, 50 DPI. I'm like, I can't publish it. It's not really print quality photo, even though it's so great. And so that was one of the most frustrating things for me. But
And that really is a bad thing too, because in the early Gen Cons, you had the people who are now dead and gone, or the people who are now old and fat. Yes, yeah. And in those days, you also had the daring costumes. The ladies who wanted to dress themselves up as drow, so they didn't have access to pigments, so they melted chocolate and rubbed it all over themselves. So then, of course, they'd be walking through the convention, and every guy would want to have his picture taken with them, and there'd be these fingerprints and armprints, but then also every dog in the vicinity wanted some chocolate. There were some of the visuals from the early Gen Cons, and there's one where some guy had a lance, like a full-sized horse lance, and he's demonstrating something, he's swinging it around, and he caught some lady who was up on the balcony who worked for Mecca, and she's sort of like, oh! Color it into the lens. But if you got that in photo, it would be beautiful, but you couldn't stage it now. And then we had before they started bringing in some of the safety rules, there were various recreationists, teams, professional teams, who'd been in the circuses and so on, who would do sword and buckler and sword and dagger combat. And they were really good, sort of dressed quasi-musketeers, but then they'd set up a table and a chair, and so they could fence up and down and on the floor, and they'd throw daggers at each other. And then, of course, over the years, the convention, for safety reasons and for the crowding, has had to cut back on a lot of that. But the early Gen Cons, I remember seeing a photo that was up on the TSR library, which I'm sure somebody has long since spirited away, of Harold Johnson going, because one of the lady throwers has just pinned him to the corkboard with her throw and dagger, and she's dressed as, the bikini babe, the barbarian in leather, and he's sort of going, I didn't mean it. Whatever the sexist remark I made, I really didn't mean it. No. and all that stuff, and I'm sure you didn't even get that. Yeah, it was just fun. And then there were the grannies who would bring their kids, and they'd have.
This is Rick Lewis. He's the president of Flying Buffalo. He's also the president of Gamma.
I just want to say, if anybody feels cheated because I wasn't sitting here with you the whole 2 hours, you're welcome to buy me dinner tonight. I'll be around. There you go. Thanks for coming.
there's tons of stuff. Early Gen Con was how the whole gaming community got together once a year. So the drinking stories are legendary. The Callie, we carried Callie home from the safe house any number of times. And of course she was small enough you could carry her home, you know. And we'd go to Pieces of Eight, which was down on the waterfront, and Chaosium, amongst other companies, that was a favorite place to take people. Like, he'd take his whole staff there because they could talk about things without rival companies hearing it, except rival companies were sitting all around. They'd all gone to Pieces of Eight to get away from the convention so no one will hear us. So, and I'd be sitting there with my wife just giggling away as people say, well, oh, that's really exciting, that's really exciting. And because they don't want this table over here to hear it. And all that sort of stuff went on. And the time when Gen Con cleared out is it the Screaming Eagles? Is that yeah, they were coming in. And of course, all these guys in brush cuts saying, sir, to all the elevator buttons. Sir, oh, 16-4, sir. You know, it's like, oh, jeez. You know, and of course, they're getting in to the Mark Plaza and riding up in the elevators to the rooms as all the gamers with all the stuff they bought, and everybody in their outlandish costumes are leaving the rooms and going down in the elevators to the same part of the parking garage. So there were some interesting cultural clashes.
We had a senior citizen Christian bus tour come into the middle of Con on the Cob last year.
Oh, dear.
Like all the gamer geeks, we took over the entire hotel, the lobby and the hallways and everything. And then like 90 or so senior citizens and this Christian bus tour come in. I haven't heard the word freak spoken so many times in my life. I thought it would be great if we could have some kind of a mixer ball.
Right.
You know?
Oh, that would
but
be cool.
yeah, it didn't happen though.
And I have actually seen a serviceman in uniform look at the breasts of one of the ladies from the house from Dagura Khan modeling her corset and say, sir, sir. Well, no, I don't think they're male. Because he was so disconcerted in the elevator. So that sort of stuff happens all the time. But in the early days, Gen Con really was where the whole gaming community came together once a year to see each other, not just to sell stuff. I mean, the game fair, the selling stuff has grown over the years. But the original Gen Cons were far more like Origins. They were a place to play games. And any gamer who happened to make stuff, dice, would bring them along and sell them, sometimes out of a suitcase. You know, there wasn't, oh, you have to be a dealer, you have to pay this, and you have to get a booth. In the early days, there were no booths. There was a table along the side of the room in the horticultural hall.
Fantastic game, and it's depressing to hear stories of why that.
I actually have the book.
Yeah.
I think you might have given it to me last year.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I forgot I had it, and I went through to get all my prints and stuff ready for Origins like 3 days ago, and I found it mixed in with all the prints.
Yeah.
So I'll have to read it when I get home.
Yeah, it's a really good, it's a surprising read because it's not just a narrative, it's not just somebody telling a history. It's actually a string of quotations from all the interviews. So there's no real, narrator at all in the entire book. It's all just telling the stories for quotations.
Today.
Yeah.
Well, but except that the stories today are all out of order, and it's vaguely chronological. So at least you can figure out where you are in the unfolding history. Yes. Yeah, it was a cool book. There are times I felt as I was reading, oh, this is a high school yearbook for the gaming industry.
I got mine actually signed last Gen Con. I got pretty much everybody I could find to sign. I think you signed it actually too, but
Yeah, a lot of people were doing that. We're using it like a yearbook last year and going around and getting everybody to sign it. That was awesome.
When we were young and foolish. Now we're old and foolish.
Small press publishers that are putting out just a gamut of exotic games ranging from a role-playing game based on I'm Igor, the evil mad scientist assistant, all the way up to a pretty hardcore space opera statistical war game. I mean, do you guys actually feel like you have any competition? Seriously.
I don't know if we see it in RPGs, but we definitely see it in other types of games.
Right.
Board games, especially board games and computer games. And the thinking is always that you can't really do much to directly. If you worry too much about one type of game and say we need to compete, let's just do everything we do is in response to them. you're gonna fail. There's no way you can sustain that. I think it's more just staying nimble and thinking, kind of like I was talking about before, not getting so wedded to the way that the method you used to get here. That
Standing up there.
that you assume that the way you got to where you are is the only way to keep going forward. That you got to where you are by doing this, and X, Y, and Z, but to go to the next step isn't, this goofy example, but like, so I'm married. I got married back in October, and there's a different way that you act. Yeah, thank you. There's a different way you act before you get married, and then once you're married, when I kind of laugh about this, like, hey, it's a Saturday night, and we're spending it cleaning the house and cleaning up after the dog, and he made a mess, and and we'll probably just grill some burgers on the grill, and that's it. And it's different than when you act when you're married. When you're single, and if we had tried acting the way we did when we were dating, we wouldn't be able to pay our mortgage, and the house would be a dump, and our pets would be neglected. It's a certain, you can't just keep doing the same thing. The different phases would call for different tactics and how you approach things. Third edition came out, and it was a pretty big game. I'm sorry, rules-wise, but that's what you needed at that point. Because people at second edition, it was so vague and things are so scattered. But I think gamers wanted a game that was very detailed and had everything clearly laid out. And now, 8 years later, I think people feel, okay, that worked then. What do we want now? And I think
for 4.0, the rules have been significantly changed. Just do something different.
yeah, just sort of respond. Just you want to stay contemporary. You don't want to be left behind. And I think that's what you risk. Classic ways of doing things are classics for reasons, but things do change. You can't stick with something without considering why you're sticking with it.
The old rules are still there if you want to play it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh yeah, and that's as long as exactly.
I think another great example of that same sort of paradigm is the how if you're looking at the restaurant business, right? A great chef can open a restaurant, right? But a great entrepreneur is required to make it a chain.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's a completely different skill set to making a name and bringing that name out.
Exactly.
It's two completely different things. Okay, and they're complementary skill sets. Okay, but they're not the same skill set.
Yeah.
So.
And that's one thing that, that skill set. That's a great example because it is something that I think gaming is definitely going through. Because we were talking before, sure, with an RPG, you buy the one RPG, and that's all you ever need.
Right.
But board games have that same exact thing, and they're able to pull it around.
I have 15-year-old copies of my board games.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I have my entire closet. My wife loves board games. That's our big thing. She doesn't like RPGs, but she likes board games. And it doesn't feel weird to once a month go buy any board game and play it. And you play it maybe once, or something like Arkham Horror where we played it once a week for 3 months, and still want to play. I love that game. Or or something like say I don't know.
Understand that?
Oh, yeah.
You understand the monster movement phase. You understand that.
We got lucky the first time. Well, I played with some people who were like, this is how we win Arkham Horror. And we're like, this is what we do now. And it was kind of like, okay. And super regimented. And we super ninja and kind of lucky and we won. And then there's the next time we played and we're like, oh my God, how did we win last time? And we all get eaten. But that was awesome too. That was fantastic. But I got hooked on that game when I was playing the hobo, the homeless guy. And I rose to become sheriff of Arkham, driving around in my police cruiser with a Tommy gun, gunning down deep ones. I was like, yes, I want to play this game every week. And then I was the guy who got eaten on turn 2. But I think the way it worked was, you're lost in space and time. What does that mean? Well, Azathoth is the guy we're going. Oh, you're dead. Yeah. Whoever just kills you if you get lost. I forget who it was. I think it's Azathoth who does that. But yeah, that's a good example of a game that it came out in the 80s. And then Fantasy Flight, they didn't just reprint the game. They kind of looked around and said, what do people expect of a board game? They expect good components and nice artwork. And the original game's a great game, but they kind of needed to make change so they could stay relevant to someone who'd played Descent or Runebound, and other popular board games. So it's kind of, you always want to try to stay ahead of the game. So.
What was tough about making 4th edition, making it at least different than 3rd, as opposed to just being something similar with only a few basic changes?
The hardest thing, really kind of key was saying take a lot of the classic adventures and use those as your barometer. That you should be able to play through the Giant series, the Drow series, and Queen of the Demon Web Pits back in the day. And play through those the way Gary sort of wrote them and intended them to be. And the rules need to be able to support that for it to feel like D&D. And then from there, essentially start over. That's your goal, and how are you going to get there in a way that makes the game easy to learn, fun to play, and something that encourages GM creativity and maybe more storytelling than in third edition. That was kind of one of the goals, was to sort of make things easier for the DM. You know, making monsters being much simpler now. So to encourage people like, hey, the cool thing about D&D is you get to make up your stuff. You get to make up your campaign world and your stories. And really focusing on that to get people to go, you know what, if you wanted to play a game where someone just mindlessly applied the rules, you could go play a computer game, because that's essentially what the computer does. This is a game where it's a person behind that DM screen who's going to react to what you do and let you do anything that you want to try, whether that's a good idea or you're just hanging yourself, give enough rope to let them, But exactly that kind of feeling of this isn't just a programmed game, that it's something that requires creativity to really reach its full potential. But yeah, that was sort of so in a way we just kind of started over and just said what makes D&D D&D, and they did the same thing with third edition when I sort of read some of the accounts, like Monty Cook and Jonathan Tweet and stuff. It was like going back to the original white box set and saying, why did people fall in love with this game 30 years ago? And what do we have to do to make sure that they're still in love with it, and that a new generation of people falls in love with it too? And it's a different, it's a really different industry. When Gary first published the game, I mean, what else was out there? You had Avalon Hill games. You didn't have computer games were these weird things that people were playing like on, PvPs and university labs. There were probably maybe less than 1,000 people in America who had played a computer game, at that time. And so, you had a much different environment where if you look at games like Titan and stuff from that era, that's what people expected from a game, that this is what a game is supposed to, what it means. And I think that, it's very much, D&D is very much a product of its time. And when it no longer becomes a product of its time, its era, the current era it rests in, I think that's when it becomes in danger of becoming irrelevant to that era. Because so much of it relies on people understanding it, really understanding the game and being able to create stuff for it and build their worlds and stories.
Give me something you're really proud of. Something that when you started writing this game, you didn't expect, and now that you're looking back at it, you go, well, damn, it does this. I'm kind of glad.
It's actually a pretty basic thing, but and this is like, sorry, I told some of this story. Back in 1981, when I got my basic set, and I looked at the thief, this is cool. I want to be the tricky guy. This is really neat. Made a thief with my 4 hit points, my armor class 6, and just died immediately. So I wanted a thief to play, and even the rogue, like in third edition when I first started, the rogue's kind of cool. I was playing a halfling rogue probably, but it's still like, unless I go really twinky, and I'm not a power, which is funny, I'm the lead developer, I'm just doing all the rules and stuff, and I can spot power gaming, I can know how to stop it, because I hate power gaming. Like, I don't play that way at all. It really turns me off. So I'd be kind of like, unless I try to twink this guy out, he's, my rogue's still kind of a lame fighter, who when I sneak attack, that's great, and then I get killed because I'm standing next to a monster. So my first, the final 4th edition thing, my first character I'm playing right now is a rogue, and it was like, I want this rogue to feel the way I wanted that rogue to feel 27 years ago now, of I'm this cool, stealthy kind of assassin guy, and sure, I might not be as durable as the fighter, but if you don't see me coming, I'm going to take you down. And that felt really cool. That's the thing I'm most proud of. When I play the rogue, it feels like the way I always wanted the rogue to feel. And I've gotten some comments and not necessarily about the rogue in particular, but actually, someone made some about the rogue, but saying things like, this feels the way I always wanted the game to feel. And that is, that's the best compliment I've got. So.
Yeah, I can finally play a priest without having to sigh before I start the character. I'll play a priest.
Yeah.
No, it's now. Can I?
And that was a great example of well, why should it suck to play the cleric? Let's forget it. Your healing's free, right? Because you know what? That just makes the game more fun that you can heal people. And we had to limit it in some way, so it wasn't just continual healing so no one dies. It was like, forget it. It's exactly the kind of issue we said, forget it. Just because 20 years ago it sucked to play the cleric doesn't mean that it has to suck to play the cleric today. We're going to make it cool. We're going to make it, you're going to be the healer, but we're going to let you cast, I remember one of the playtesters saying, every round I get to cast a divine spell and blast someone, from a distance with holy energy. And that is so cool. I think I was just blown away. You're letting me do what I always wanted to do. Why not let this holy warrior guy just call down the wrath of the gods on people instead of okay, wrath of the gods, and okay, now I'm going to hit you with my mace. It's getting your mind wrapped around hey, make the classes do what they want to do, and don't get so worried about, what are these kids today doing? It's, just let people play the game.
So do you still see Dungeon and Dragon Mag still kind of fill the same role as they did before?
I think they're going to feel similar, but maybe a bit more critical. With the magazines coming back in-house, they go through the development and design teams and the worlds team. And I don't know, like if you're familiar with the RPGA, like with living stuff, the rule now is if it's in Dragon, the day it comes out, you can use it in your character. Unless it's something like specifically said, hey, this is really, here's rules for like classless D&D or a point buy system. That's just really optional, kind of unearthed arcana kind of rule. But otherwise, like, we just did an article with a bunch of illusion spells to the wizard, and when you make your living Forgotten Realms character, you can use those spells. You don't need a special certificate. You don't need anyone's permission. It is seen as exactly as core as Martial Power or Player's Handbook 2 or anything else. This is.
Someone just said to me it doesn't happen until it's been officially compiled.
No, I think it should be as it comes out. Or actually, that might just be because at the end of the month they get put into a PDF.
Yeah, that's the.
So that might be the cutoff point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, Chris Tulak would know exactly.
Yeah, which is it's so new that we don't know.
Yeah, but I think it's going to be. I think at the end of the month it'll be all the articles that month get put into one PDF.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have a subscription, you can still go buy the individual issues, or like, oh, something came out a year ago that I want to check out. So and it's really going to be much more integrated into, like I mentioned earlier, like Star Wars Saga and like a Book of Nine Swords is another good example of where we kind of tested stuff. I think you'll see a lot of that coming out in Dragon, where like we might have an idea for like, here's an interesting direction we think we can take with a class or just a set of powers. Okay, let's put it in Dragon and see what people say. And, we won't just let's just release it and hope it doesn't suck, but it'll be developed and tested and looked at. But I think it's a good place for us to have more of a dialogue with the fans instead of. I mean, that's something that's nice about a periodical thing is you get that feedback in a nice tight loop. It's not like, well, we did this book a year ago, so I can't even remember what we were thinking we did this, and people are saying this about it. Why did we do it that way? Who knows, right? There's no. Where this is a much more discrete elements. So hopefully that's something that we can achieve. With the,
Is it still going to take user submissions and incorporate the fans? And
there should be submission guidelines up on the website now, and that's actually one of the nice things too. And this happened when I developed. So I did some development work on some of the articles, and I emailed the editor and said, hey, by the way, this guy whoever wrote this, send me his contact info because I think he'd be a good freelancer. This is something we want to check out. I know there's a couple books now that we're working on. We have a lot of new freelancers working on it, either recruited through the RPGA or through Dragon submissions. It's a slow process because they get a lot of submissions. So if you submit, it's going to require some patience, but it's definitely going to be. We know we need better tools to recruit good writers and gamers, and there's a lot of people out there. Every DM is running their campaign, getting experience essentially designing for D&D. So that's one way we want to try to get people do a better job of recruiting.
I just played in terms of first, second, and third editions. Like, do they just stop like making anything of them, or you can only find the old ones?
We won't publish new books for them, but all those books are available as PDFs, so you can still buy them all online. That's essentially because we know people still play those games. So there's no reason to not. I mean, people want to give us money. I guess that's the attitude. So yeah, I mean, if you're playing first edition, you can still go and get any book you wanted. I think every first edition book is out there in PDF. I forget. There's a couple of different websites we don't sell them directly. There's a couple websites that sell them.
Yeah, like Drive Through RPG.
Yeah, I think Paizo sells them too. But yeah, so that's something where we definitely don't. Yeah, we don't. Just because we print new stuff for it doesn't mean we don't know people are out there playing those games.
So are you like overloaded with submissions? I guess for people who want to publish their own campaigns for it.
Yeah, we tend to get, as I mentioned for Dragon, we tend to get a lot of submissions for it. And the mistake I think a lot of people make is they get this idea, I'm going to send in this really long, big, huge article, it'll be my big thing. When your best bet is to start small. Because when you start small, not only it's not as ambitious, you can maybe write it over a weekend or a few hours a night for a while, but it lets us get a much better view into your ability, because we're not trying to digest like 50,000 words. It's, here, I designed 10 new spells, and here's how they work, and it's a lot easier to get a grip on what someone's doing and what their design ethos is, and if it's something like, hey, this guy is pretty good, let's see what else we can do. It's easy to be overly ambitious early on. So if you're looking to write, start small and build, because it's just like anything, you have to practice and you get better. I'm a better designer and writer now than I was even a year ago, just learn stuff.
Is Eberron still in the product roadmap?
Yeah.
It's just not.
Yep.
Just hasn't been announced.
So we had Warforged in the first issue of Dragon.
Right.
Next issue of Dragon, I think, is going to have. I think it's going to have the Artificer. I'm not sure. I know we've talked about that class. I think it's coming out in the next issue. And then after that, I think we're going to have pretty regular Eberron content. And I think it'll probably be. It's definitely on the schedule for what settings we want to do. Because there's a lot of people playing Eberron right now. We don't want to just leave them out in the cold. So that's definitely something where, like, you know, you won't have to wait long for it. So.
That's good to hear because I really like Eberron setting.
And I think if Keith Baker and his blog and website, I think, has been posting stuff that, like, some 4E stuff he's been working on for his own use for Eberron. So, and in a lot of ways, I think Eberron is a really good, you know, the cinematic action and stuff thing really fits 4E well. So.
And that's a 2009 setting, right? Is Eberron?
I don't know if that's been announced, so I can't. I always lose track of what we can say and what we
I think
can't.
there's some interview, I don't remember who it was. Forgotten Realms was 2008 and Eberron was 2009, and then from there.
It wouldn't surprise me if it was like 2009.
Is that kind of the plan to come out with a new setting every
Yeah,
year?
we want to do a new setting every year. And the way we're doing the releases is you get the DM's book for the setting, the player's book, and usually an adventure to get you started, and then the rest will be online in Dragon. That we don't want to try to keep putting out books to the setting. You know, you don't want people to feel they have to buy all the books to understand the setting. You also don't want to detail the setting so much that it gets kind of bloated and confused. We'd rather do like more discrete chunks, and also just, you know, what do people want to know more about. You know, we did a book on Waterdeep for 3rd edition Forgotten Realms, which is cool, but you're also kind of bound by, okay, how long can this book be? You know, where if you do a magazine, you could do like 3 or 4 articles a year on Waterdeep and slowly build it up, and and see what people like and what's going on in the novels and stuff like that, living Forgotten Realms and stuff.